We remember this all too well. 40 years ago today, January 28th, 1986, 7 NASA astronauts were killed after the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded during liftoff over Cape Canaveral. Many people remember exactly where they were and what they were doing.
Our Conan Nolan joins us now with how viewers right here in Southern California saw it here. Conan.
They had become so routine, local television stations didn't bother to break in that day for the launch of STS-51L, the Space Shuttle Challenger. But we did.
This is a special report from Channel 4 News. Good morning, I'm Ken Shocknick, and Space Shuttle Challenger is just a few seconds away from blasting off from the Kennedy Space Center near Cape Canaveral, Florida.
KNBC TV's Kent Shocknick provided the coverage. The station's morning anchor and aerospace reporter, Kent had covered the shuttle program from its inception.
And liftoff.
Solid rocket boosters kicking in.
25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
For Shocknick and the station, this was a local story.
Because, you know, the shuttle was built in Downey. It was landing and tested out of the Edwards Air Force Base, and so we had a great stake in Southern California.
Then there was the crew. Ellison Onizuka, the first U.S. Asian-American astronaut. Judy Resnick, the second American woman to fly in space. Physicist Ronald McNair, the second African-American astronaut. Veteran astronaut Michael Smith. Mission commander Dick Scobie. Payload specialist Greg Jarvis. And Krista McAuliffe, an elementary school teacher who had been picked from 11,000 applicants as part of NASA's Teacher in Space program.
This was one of those situations where launches become so routine that NASA had to tweak each launch to make it look a little bit sexier, a little bit more glitzy, so that coverage would continue, because the bucks follow Buck Rogers.
It's always amazing to hear how quickly the shuttle moves.
At the time, America's space program had a stellar reputation. That all changed 73 seconds into the launch.
The shuttle mission will launch. My God.
1 minute 15
There's been an explosion.
Velocity 2,900 feet per second.
I can see a solid rocket booster has broken away from Shuttle Challenger. That's what you're looking at in the middle of your screen. We must
Contingency procedures are in effect.
assume that the crew is not alive. Ladies and gentlemen, I have covered the space shuttle launches since the very first launch, since before the first launch itself, going way back, and nothing like this has ever happened.
I was shaken up, and I believe when the camera came back to me, I had to take a big, long swallow, thinking about everything we had just seen.
Images that were particularly shocking to a unique audience. Following the first Teacher in Space were millions of children watching in schools across the nation.
For the first time, we're watching a real person, a teacher, go into space. And it was like she was taking us along with her.
Amy Moyer is a news producer at NBC4. She remembers the confusion and silence while watching with her third-grade classmates.
And then I just remember turning around to the back of the classroom and seeing my teacher and the librarian, and they were just holding each other. And I saw that they were crying.
The nation was stunned. President Ronald Reagan that night.
We will never forget them, nor the last time we saw them this morning, as they prepared for their journey and waved goodbye and slipped the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God.
40 years later, memories fade. There were no flowers today at the Shuttle Memorial in Little Tokyo.
I actually wondered, when this anniversary was coming up, if there would be anyone who really cared, because the world has moved on so much. This was a very big deal. It did change everything.
He's right on that point. NASA changed. Corporations changed their culture and their management style. There were changes in technology and in journalism. Too often, we were cheerleaders for NASA. That ended. Remember, that morning, there were engineers who had called on the launch to be scrubbed because it was simply too cold, fearing that the O-rings that kept the fuel tanks together would fail. Management didn't listen. Lots of memories, but certainly a lot of lessons still being learned from what happened then.
I remember watching Kent that morning and thinking, no one knows more about what's going on now. And when he was stunned by what he saw, I mean, he did such a great job really interpreting that there was something wrong immediately.
You know, Ellison Onizuka and Judith Rednick were friends of his because he got to know them while he was covering. Before he came back to Los Angeles as an SC grad, he worked in Orlando where he covered the first launches. And he says, you couldn't go to the supermarket without running into an astronaut. And he got to know them pretty well. So not only was he covering that, but he was announcing the death of two of his pals.
Oh, that is so hard. I remember he had a book that was 3 inches thick, and it had everything about the shuttle flight system, and he knew, as you said, everything from A to Z. And we never looked at a flight the same way. We always waited for the shuttle boosters to do their thing, and once we knew it was clear, then we could breathe.
Right, but even Kent acknowledges, and plenty of people since then, that there weren't enough questions being asked of NASA at the time. More were asked, obviously, later and since. But remember, I remember that it was so cold in Florida. It was about 7 degrees, in the morning, and then it was about 20 degrees by the time of the launch. Even people, the engineers on the pad said, well, we're not launching today, because they had never launched at that kind of temperature. It was twice as cold as they had ever launched. And again, the engineers weren't listened to. That changed.
Yeah, we're not going to forget that Challenger happened, or Columbia after that.
Yeah, and it was after Columbia. And I have to tell you that there are all sorts of institutions in Southern California. There are schools from Oxnard to the high desert that are focused on science and technology because of what happened at Challenger. There's a school named after Kristen McAuliffe in Los Alamitos. And so institutionally, certainly we've learned a lot. I mean, we haven't forgotten about it. But the lessons that are learned there are still being learned, and you can never take anything for granted when it comes to the space program.
40 years. It's hard to believe it's been that long.